The Dread Legion had never known fear. It was bred out of them, burned away in the crucible of genetic perfection and endless war. Their bodies were sculpted for battle. Tall, sinewy frames reinforced with exoskeletal plating, eyes that could perceive the subtlest movement in darkness, and reflexes faster than thought. They had conquered world after world, crushed species deemed superior, and dismantled every military force that dared resist. Fear was an alien concept, something weaker beings clung to before their inevitable destruction. General Viraq stood at the heart of the fleet, gazing at the blue and green orb through the viewport of the warship Dominion's wrath. Terra 5, the latest in a long line of conquests. His command had never suffered a true defeat, and the reports indicated this would be no different. The humans were archaic in their warfare, relying on crude ballistic weapons rather than advanced energy-based systems. They had no planetary shields, no orbital defenses of note. Their armies were disorganized, their tactics simplistic. It was almost insulting to deploy the Legion against them, but protocol demanded a full occupation. A hololithic projection flickered to life before him, displaying a scout commander's report. "Resistance has been sporadic," the officer droned, his voice carrying the mechanical precision of a soldier who had never known failure. "Minimal casualties. Humans scatter under assault. Victory projections remain within expected parameters." Viraq barely acknowledged the report. This was routine. The first waves had landed in remote regions, eliminating small population centers before advancing toward critical infrastructure. A standard maneuver: sever the enemy's ability to coordinate, ensure maximum psychological collapse. Terror was a weapon as potent as any plasma rifle. Yet something nagged at him. It was subtle, an imperceptible shift in the air of his command deck. He turned to his second-in-command, a veteran named Scar, whose silvered carapace bore the scars of 100 battles. "You sense it too," Viraq stated. It wasn't a question. Scar's mandibles clicked in irritation. "The humans fight strangely. They do not engage in mass. They strike, then vanish. We have encountered this before. Primitive guerrilla tactics. Ineffective in the long term." Viraq folded his arms. "And yet they kill. More than they should." Scar hesitated. The Dread Legion did not measure wars in losses, for their casualties were negligible. But something was different here. The Legion was winning, but not with the ease it should have. Squads went silent, without explanation. Perimeter forces were discovered dead, their weapons unfired, their bodies cooling in the dirt. Drones scanning the terrain reported movement, yet failed to capture the source. The humans should have been scattered, panicked, driven from their strongholds. Instead, they were ghosts in the mountains, striking from nowhere and vanishing before retribution could come. Viraq turned back to the viewport, watching the clouds swirl over the planet's surface. "Deploy a battalion to Outpost Theta," he ordered. "Wipe out whatever resistance remains there." Scar hesitated. Theta was secured 6 hours ago. A silence settled between them. Viraq turned slowly, then explained why we lost contact with them 2 hours later. Scar had no answer. The descent was swift, a column of drop pods streaking through the upper atmosphere like burning lances. The Legionnaires inside were silent, their minds linked to the combat network, weapons primed before they even touched the ground. The moment the pod struck soil, hatches burst open, and the Legion emerged in perfect synchronization. They moved with mechanical precision, weapons sweeping in flawless arcs, covering every angle. Outpost Theta was a ruin. The prefabricated structure still stood, but there was no movement, no bodies, no sign of struggle. The comms array remained intact, yet no signal was broadcast. It was as if the entire garrison had simply ceased to exist. Squad leader Kale stepped forward, his rifle raised. "Thermal scan," he ordered. The results fed directly into his visor. The landscape was cold. No life signatures detected. He turned, scanning the treeline, but the dense vegetation provided countless places to hide. It was possible the humans had retreated. But then where were the bodies? Where were the fallen legionnaires? A shadow moved. Kale's reflexes were beyond human comprehension, his rifle already snapping toward the source before the thought had fully formed. Yet there was nothing, just trees swaying in the wind, the whisper of leaves brushing against one another. His fingers tightened around the trigger. Then the first shot rang out. It was not the searing pulse of plasma, nor the thunderous detonation of an explosive. It was a sharp, singular crack, unfamiliar, yet unmistakable. A legionnaire crumpled. No explosion, no cauterization, just a precise, devastating impact that punched through his skull, exiting the other side in a spray of violet ichor. Confusion rippled through the unit, but training overrode hesitation. Kale barked a command, and the formation adjusted instantly. Scanners flared to life, searching for the enemy. There was nothing. The shot had come from the ridge, yet no movement was visible. The wind carried no scent, no presence. A second shot, another soldier down. Panic began to creep into their ranks. Not overt, not yet, but a seed planted in the unshakable certainty of their dominance. The enemy was unseen. The enemy was precise. Kale activated full-spectrum analysis. The results flooded his visor, thermal, motion, biosignatures. All negative, but they were there. He knew it. His mandibles clicked in frustration. "Suppressive fire," he ordered. The legionnaires unleashed a storm of plasma into the ridge, scorching rock and foliage alike. Trees ignited, stone vaporized, and the air filled with the acrid scent of burning vegetation. Yet no screams followed. No bodies fell. Then another shot rang out. Kale barely registered the impact before his world turned to darkness. On board the Dominion's raft, Viraq watched the tactical display with narrowing eyes. The feed from Theta's battalion flickered, pulsing with error signals. Red markers, casualties, multiplied at a rate he had never seen before. The numbers did not align with known human capabilities. This was not an army. This was not an uprising. This was something else. A transmission crackled through, fragmented but unmistakable. Not fighting like the others. They! Static swallowed the rest. Viraq exhaled slowly. "We have miscalculated." Scar tensed beside him. "Shall I deploy heavy artillery?" Viraq did not respond immediately. He stared at the display, at the growing field of red, at the realization settling in his gut like a stone. He had studied war his entire existence. He had dissected 1,000 battlefields, crushed rebellions, shattered armies. And yet he had never encountered this. An enemy he could not see. An enemy that did not charge, did not scatter, did not falter. A single thought entered his mind, unbidden, foreign, and wholly unfamiliar. For the first time in his long and decorated career, Viraq felt something he did not recognize. It was small, distant, yet undeniable. A whisper of fear. The wind rolled through the valley, shifting the tall grass in restless waves. The distant echoes of gunfire had faded, leaving only the natural hush of the mountain range. Sergeant Cole Harrison lay motionless beneath a tangle of brush, his rifle cradled against his shoulder, its suppressor dulling the crack of each shot to a whisper. He adjusted his scope, scanning the terrain with practiced patience. The enemy was learning. That much was clear. The first squads had been arrogant, marching into the valley in perfect formation, as if sheer presence alone would shatter resistance. They had paid for that mistake in blood. But the second wave, these soldiers were different. They moved cautiously now, abandoning their rigid patterns, spreading out, using terrain for cover. They weren't mindless. They were adapting. Harrison exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steady, his breath synchronized with the rhythmic squeeze of his trigger. Another alien form entered his sight, a towering, armored figure sweeping the area with a glowing scanner. A spotter. Dangerous. He watched for a moment, measuring movement, gauging distance. Then he adjusted half a degree, let the crosshairs settle just below the alien's ridged brow, and squeezed the trigger. The Legionnaire crumpled. A clean shot to the optic node. No sound, no warning. One less set of eyes to find them. Beside him, Corporal Matt Rivers shifted slightly, his rifle barrel glinting dully in the filtered light. "That's the fifth one," Rivers muttered, his voice barely audible through the radio link. "They're getting nervous." "They should be," Harrison replied. His gaze never left the scope. The Dread Legion was unraveling. Their discipline, once unshakable, had begun to fracture under the weight of uncertainty. They were predators who had never known prey that could strike from nowhere, that could kill without being seen. The bodies they left behind weren't charred husks from plasma fire, weren't shattered by blunt force. They were precise kills, single shots, always to vital points, always leaving just enough time for the others to feel the weight of what had happened. It was fear, Harrison realized. Real fear. The enemy was trying to adjust, but there was a fundamental difference between adaptation and mastery. The Dread Legion had superior technology, superior numbers, but they lacked something far more important. They lacked patience. A faint movement to the left caught his attention. Another Legionnaire, creeping through the underbrush, slower this time, more deliberate. Harrison could almost admire the attempt. Almost. He marked the target, waiting, letting the alien settle into a false sense of security. The moment its guard dropped, when it started scanning the wrong sector, he took the shot. The body hit the ground with a dull thud. A moment later, the valley exploded with plasma fire. Harrison ducked lower, though he was already well concealed. The enemy fired blindly, their weapons scorching rock and vegetation, carving deep, glowing scars into the landscape. It was the same mistake every desperate force made. They lashed out, trying to fight an enemy they couldn't see, wasting ammunition, revealing positions. 2 squads moving left, Rivers reported, his voice clipped. "They're trying to flank." Harrison shifted his position slightly, sighting down the ridge where 2 alien figures were weaving through the trees. Their movements were faster now, erratic, but panic made them predictable. He took another breath, lined up his shot, and fired. The first fell before it even realized it had been spotted. The second hesitated, and that hesitation killed it. 2 more shots, 2 more bodies. Silence returned. "They'll keep coming," Rivers murmured. "They always do." Harrison eased back, inching away from his position. The key to an effective marksman wasn't just accuracy, it was movement, unpredictability. A sniper who lingered too long in one place became a target. He signaled to Rivers, and the 2 melted into the foliage, slipping away like ghosts. Further up the ridge, another voice crackled in their earpieces. "This is Bishop. We've got movement north, near the abandoned comms tower. They're deploying heavier units. That was expected. The Legion was done playing games." Harrison signaled Rivers to change direction, their steps silent against the damp earth. The comms tower was a natural high ground, a strategic vantage point. If the enemy thought they could reclaim it, they were about to learn another lesson. They moved swiftly, but deliberately, circling the battlefield like wolves stalking wounded prey. A distant howl of engines signaled dropships inbound. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Harrison tightened his grip around the rifle, a small, grim smile forming beneath his breath. Let them come. Smoke coiled through the air, thick with the acrid scent of scorched earth and ionized metal. The once pristine valley, now littered with the bodies of fallen legionnaires, bore the scars of a battle the invaders had never anticipated. The Dread Legion had come expecting swift conquest, but what remained of them now were scattered, leaderless remnants. Hunted men grasping at tactics they had never needed to learn. Sergeant Cole Harrison watched through his scope as the last organized squads attempted to regroup near the ruined comms tower. Their movements, once precise and unshakable, now held a frantic edge. They no longer advanced with confidence. They hesitated, checked corners. Their heads turned too quickly, searching for threats they couldn't see. The aura of invincibility had shattered, leaving only soldiers gripped by the unfamiliar weight of their own mortality. The battle was already won, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Harrison adjusted his aim, shifting slightly to compensate for the distance. A legionnaire, taller than the rest, armor marked with command insignia, barked orders to the few remaining troops. They were digging in, establishing defensive positions, setting up automated turrets, desperate measures for a force that had never needed to defend before. He exhaled. The shot was clean, precise. The officer dropped before his words could finish, body crumpling in an awkward heap. The others froze. For a long, terrible moment, none of them moved. Then the formation collapsed entirely. A single shot, and the illusion of control was gone. From the ridge, Corporal Matt Rivers let out a low whistle. That did it. Harrison didn't respond. He was already scanning for the next target. One by one, the remaining aliens abandoned their positions, retreating toward the landing site. Plasma fire lit the trees, the ground, anywhere they thought the enemy might be, but never where the humans truly were. Harrison and his team had shifted long before the counterattack began, moving like wraiths through the high ground, unseen and unstoppable. A transmission crackled through their earpieces. Bishop to all teams. Enemy command vessel is deploying retrieval craft. They're pulling out. Rivers exhaled. So that's it, huh? They're running. They don't have a choice, Harrison murmured. For the first time in recorded history, the Dread Legion was retreating. The great conquerors, the fearsome war machine that had crushed entire civilizations, had been reduced to this, a battered, broken force limping back to its ships. But one of them wasn't leaving. Amid the chaos, a lone figure stood his ground, larger than the rest, clad in heavier armor, his bearing rigid despite the slaughter around him. General Viraq. Harrison studied him through the scope, finger resting lightly on the trigger. He could end it here, a clean shot through the skull, an execution with no ceremony. But something in the way Viraq stood, unmoving even as his soldiers fled, gave him pause. Then, slowly, the general raised a hand, not to attack, not to call for reinforcements. A challenge. Harrison lowered the rifle. For the first time, he stood, stepping into the open. The battlefield stretched between them, littered with the dead, the air thick with smoke and dying embers. Viraq turned to face him fully, eyes burning with something that was not quite anger, not quite respect. The general unsheathed a blade, a wicked, curved thing that crackled with energy. A weapon meant for duels, not war. A warrior's weapon. Harrison let his rifle rest against his shoulder. He didn't move for his knife. Didn't move at all. Instead, he reached down, slowly, deliberately, and chambered a fresh round into his rifle. Viraq stiffened. The realization was written across the alien's face, even through the rigid features. This was not a fight he could win. There would be no glorious melee, no chance to reclaim his honor in close combat. This war had never been fought on his terms. It had been fought from the shadows, from the ridges, from places he could not see. A sharp, final crack echoed through the valley. The general staggered. The energy blade flickered, sputtered, fell from his grasp. He remained standing for a moment longer, as if his body refused to believe what had just happened. Then he collapsed. Silence followed. The remaining legionnaires, seeing their leader fall, abandoned all pretense of resistance. Dropships roared to life, engines flaring, lifting off with whatever survivors they could carry. The war was over. Rivers exhaled, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Damn. Harrison said nothing. He just watched as the last of the invaders disappeared into the sky, leaving behind only the dead and the quiet hum of the wind. Bishop's voice crackled through the radio again. Command confirms full withdrawal. We're clear. A pause. You still with us, Harrison? He let out a breath. Yeah, still here. The transmission cut out. The world was quiet again. The Dread Legion had never feared anyone. Until now.